Are you considering upgrading from your smartphone to a DSLR or perhaps a point and shoot camera? Or perhaps you have a point and shoot camera or a DSLR already and you're wondering what all these terms and words and acronyms are. Well, I have compiled for you a list of A to Z terms glossary. So starting at the start of the alphabet, we're starting with the letter A and the word is aperture. Aperture is the opening in which light passes through the lens and onto your camera's sensor. The diameter of the aperture, also known as the f-stop, affects the exposure and it affects the depth of field. The lower the f-stop number, the wider the aperture is. B for bokeh. Using a lens at its widest aperture can turn a very busy background into a soft, smooth canvas, making your image pop. Bokeh are the distorted shapes that are behind a subject. C for composition. Composition is the manner in which elements are positioned within a photo. Composition is one of the most important elements to take in a great photo. The letter D for depth of field, or DOF. Depth of field is the distance between the closest and the farthest object away within the focused area of an image. E for exposure. Exposure is the amount of light that passes through your camera's lens and onto the camera's sensor. Exposure determines how bright or how dark an image will be. The exposure of an image is determined by ISO, it's determined by aperture, and it's determined by the shutter speed. F, frames per second, or FPS. FPS determines the speed at which a camera can take photos. If you are capturing action or wildlife, you will need to be able to have a high FPS, high frames per second, to capture the right timed image. If you are capturing portraits, then a low FPS will be suitable. G for golden hour. Golden hour, also referred to as the magic hour, is the period of light 1 hour before sunup and 1 hour before sundown. Because of that huge light source, the sun, is low on the horizon, it takes on a warm golden shade of light compared to when it is high in the sky, say at noontime. H for histogram. The histogram is a visual graph that represents shadows on the left side of the graph and highlights on the right side of the graph. I is for ISO. ISO is the measurement of light sensitivity to the camera's sensor. The higher the ISO, the more light information will be captured. The lower the ISO means less light is captured, but a cleaner, sharper image is taken. J for JPEG. JPEG is the standard format in which pictures are compressed into a file. Due to the compression of JPEG files, it usually means smaller file size, but less information is captured. K is for Kelvin. Kelvin is a unit that is used to measure color temperature. L is for light meter. The light meter is a device or its software that is built into your DSLR or your point and shoot camera that determines the best exposure value for that specific shot. M is for manual. As it sounds, the photographer has complete manual control over settings. Shooting in manual allows you to get creative with a shot and therefore considered a must for the pro photographer. N is for noise. Noise is a visual distortion that looks like tiny coloured grains of sand on a photo or on a video. This noise is very visible in photos or in images that have been captured using high ISOs with a very slow shutter speed. Noise is the digital version of film grain. O is for overexposed or overexposure. Overexposure occurs when the exposure value is higher than it should be. The captured image is very bright. Colours may appear to be washed out. P is for pixel. A pixel is a small unit of colour on a digital display. Just remember, the number of pixels doesn't always determine how good a camera is. Q is for quality. Yes, it's very vague, but quality. One way to consider the quality of an image is to evaluate composition, sharpness and exposure. R is for RAW. RAW is a file format that saves the image as it was captured by the camera's sensor. Unlike JPEG file format, there is very little processing and compression of the file, meaning you can capture more information and you can take more control over the processing of the photo. S is for shutter speed. Shutter speed is the length of time in which the camera's sensor is exposed to the light when taking a photo. Fast shutter speeds allow photographers to freeze the action, while slow shutter speeds capture the blur of subjects in motion. T is for time-lapse. Time-lapse is a technique where the frequency at which frames are captured is more spread out than the frequency used to view the sequence. When played, it appears time is moving faster and thus time is lapsing. Processes that would normally appear slow to the human eye become very pronounced and sped up. U is for underexposed. I talked about overexposure earlier. Well, underexposure means that the exposure value is lower than what is required, usually resulting in a photo that is too dark to produce good contrast. V is for vignetting. Vignetting is the occurrence in which the edges of a photo appear to be less bright, especially in the corners. Most post-processing software can detect the lens that is vignetting and correct it in the software. W is for white balance. White balance is the adjustment that is made to an image to compensate for the temperature of the light that is illuminating the sensor. You can adjust the white balance either manually in camera, or you can adjust the white balance in your post-processing software. X, well, there are only around 400 words that begin with X, and guess what? None of them are related to cameras, none of them are related to photography. Yellow filter. Yellow filter is a filter that is used when shooting monochrome pictures. It is very popular with black and white photography. And Z is for zoom lens. Zoom lenses are lenses whose focal lengths can be modified, bringing the subject closer than what it actually really is. So there you have it. There is the ultimate camera and photography terms glossary. I'm Matty Grambo. Please do consider subscribing and giving the video a thumbs up.